some people. Yeah, welcome back to the session Connecting Towards New Horizons. And what we are trying with this panel, and then you will see why it's also at the end, looking forward and digesting what we heard over the 2 days and trying to transform it now into something that we may communicate with other communities, is to reach out to communities who either have already worked together with us in the past or are excellent candidates because they are very strong stakeholders when it comes to language, linguistic diversity, language technology, language infrastructures in Europe. Before my opening remarks, let me introduce briefly the panelists. This is starting from the very right. This is Hans Fenstermacher, who you already heard yesterday on a different panel, actually moderating a panel, the CEO of the Globalization and Localization Association and Industry Association. By the way, in the meantime, I was asked a couple of times, is that an American association or a European? It is a worldwide association, but as far as I know, it has more members in Europe than in the United States. So it's a real global, so that reflects the multilinguality of Europe, and also it's also incorporated in Europe, so in addition. Because I was asked a couple of times. So then it's Sigve Gramstad, the Vice Chair of the Council of Europe's Committee of Experts on Regional and Minority Languages. Sigve is not sitting right next to Hans, but there he is. Then Jochen Hummel, who many of you know and heard yesterday, the Chair of the Steering Committee of LT Innovate. Kimmo Rossi, who you just heard before, of the European Commission, responsible there for the language technology area. Meirion Prys Jones, the CEO of the Network to Promote Linguistic Diversity. And Tamás Váradi, this time not in his function as a member of Metanet, but as General Secretary of the European Federation of National Institutes for Language, EFNIL, the organization in which the national institutions of the being concerned with the national languages, research and documentation and so on of national languages are concerned. So this is quite a mixed area, language service provider industry, then the European Commission, then a group working on minority languages, people representing research institutes, companies, different stakeholders, and everything. The only thing they have in common is this theme of languages and language. Now, is it easy or is it difficult to unite these people and to come to some joint action? We will hopefully find out during the course of the panel discussion. Before I get to that, I want to say that several comments I heard already during the conference go in the same line as Kimmo Rossi's remark, that there has been quite a change in the last 5 years. And the continuous funding, but also the continuous community work, and I thank many of you for playing a major role there, is really the reason for this positive change. And it's not only the size of the community by more companies, more researchers coming into the networks, other stakeholders who we never thought of before, but who are actually uniting and seem to have overlapping interests. But it is also the development of the technology and the markets that are driving this. When I see now how difficult it is for me to keep the senior researchers by only offering them the very good salaries that we can pay to senior researchers in Germany. No, very good is not good enough, yeah? So they want to have more than very good salaries, so they are going for twice the salaries in industry, because major industry is building up language technology like crazy. Yeah? So if you go to big companies now and you see what they are doing. And it's interesting that whether a company calls itself a knowledge company or a document company or a company of communication like Nuance, what they all have in common is language and languages. And if you look what they are really doing, whether they say document or so, they have lots of software struggling with a variety in language. In one language, in several languages, they all need to get to some meaning and are not able to do it and fighting it and trying to circumvent it. So that's, they are trying to cross language boundaries, and many of these new developments, if you read the newest announcements and the product plans by the Microsofts, the IBMs with IBM Watson, with the of Google, with the knowledge graph, with the Google glasses, it's all language. And why has it come to that point? It has come to that point because the first part of the evolution of IT on the electronic level is not yet over, but it has reached a platform, it has reached potentials that are not nearly tapped by what could be done in software, namely really linking them to the needs, to the knowledge, to the interests, to the emotions of the users. And that all goes by language. So not all of it, yeah, there are also pictures, yeah, and maybe warm feelings of a space heater, yeah, and other things, but it's, to a large extent, it's knowledge. And so we shouldn't be surprised that in the end, it's knowledge that brings things together. If you think how many areas, may it be e-government, yeah? Take e-government. E-government, people doing content management, like Hans von Freiberg, yeah? E-government, content management. And then you pick randomly two other things, maybe hospitals, medicine, and if you take how they get together, take any two or four or three unrelated things in society, how they come together, one of the things that really connects them in the infrastructures and in the software is always language. It's always the case. So we happen to be in a field that looks to some people esoteric and marginal, working on language, yeah? To many people, oh, they say language technology, what's that? But if you look at the place, it is really placed strategically, yeah, when it comes to the common digital market. And so we are right in the center. We cannot help it, yeah? So we cannot help it. We cannot do anything against it, yeah? Because we are connecting all these things in a way. So now, leading over now to the panelists, that's why a group that seemingly is more interested in the minority rights of language communities, in the end would be connected with a group maybe that does translation. Okay, that's still obvious, so that may still be obvious. Or with a group working on better user interfaces, or with a group working on big data, yeah? Because the big data need to be usable for these members of these communities too. And in the end, we find ourselves in a complex situation that is, I have to confess it, too complex. So one of us cannot handle it, and one project cannot handle it, one network cannot handle it, one initiative, one IP, not even a council. It's bigger than that. It's still bigger. So it can only be attached by a federation and always changing connections and a huge ecosystem of different stakeholder communities, maybe only overlapping a little bit, but still in a very important point, in a very important area, and working together and coming together and building up joint pressure, because in the end, society doesn't work by desire, but only by pressure. So we can desire whatever we want, nothing will happen. We go home and all desire, and even if we have 1,000 other people, 1 million others who desire, nothing happens. You have to build up pressure. And so this is the point where we need now to talk, really, now we talk. Now we come to be talking, where we need to go through and see how you see it, whether you see it the same, whether you see that this connection, and it's no surprise that in our today's world, technology is pretty much combining things, yeah? Google and other things are combining other networks too. So it's no wonder that in the center is maybe not the undergraduate language teacher, but in the center now is technology. It's no wonder, yeah? That doesn't mean that the teachers and the translators and the regional people and the little industries that they are less important, but it's somehow connecting this language and this technology that we all live with every day. So I want to open then the panel, and I think I would like to go with the sequence of speakers as we have them here on our list, and I would like to ask them to make a brief statement and see whether they agree or disagree with what I just said, and whether they think that their communities, if we really want to build up pressure for doing the best for linguistic diversity in Europe, whether their communities would be able to participate. So should I start with Hans? Yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay, there we go. Thank you. Well, I would say I certainly agree with what you're saying, and there's no question that the industry of sort of commercial translation, localization, and language service and technology companies is very interested in that, plays a big role in that. I think we have some challenges ahead as we've heard them elicited here throughout the last 2 days. One of them is the extreme fragmentation of the industry. The industry is very, very diverse in terms of the types of companies, the size of companies, how they operate, and so forth, even within Europe. And we need to look to ways to unify the vision a bit. And I think the EU is really helping a lot by in a sense, to use your metaphor, pressuring the industry a bit to unify its vision. That needs to continue, and we need to work towards goals that we can share and that we can actually work as well with other organizations to actually deliver on. So that's one thing. I think another larger trend too that plays into this is well, frankly, the world is finally paying attention to language. You know, you finally have a point where I think in the greater community, in the countries and in governments, but also in industry and social interactions and so forth, language is finally at the center of things and noticeably at the center. So people are saying this is now the crux of how we move everything forward. Particularly if you take it in the greater context of, I guess, of the development that we're seeing towards what many have called a locale of one. You know, we're moving away from localization for even regions or markets to much smaller and smaller pieces of localization targets. And so language becomes increasingly important as that happens. And I think that's an area where we can really attach ourselves to what's happening out there and emphasize and place language at the center of that effort, because without it, that effort will fail. That communication, that networking effort will fail. So it definitely is something the industry desires and you know, needs to be pressured and is pressuring itself to doing. One other point I would make is that the fragmentation exists also in the types of language focus that we have, and some of that is necessary and good, but also hinders us from working forward. So, for example, translation, localization versus technology versus interpretation, which tends to have been separated from the discussion historically. I think when we start to bring in and other parts like speech and analytics and these kinds of, as we start to bring these constituencies into the discussion, we're going to find ways to unify those things. But we have to bring them together, and we have to start discussing where those overlaps are and how we can exploit them.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you very much. Now, I want to hand over to Sigve Gramstad. And since he has not talked at our events before, we would be grateful if in the very beginning he could say just a few sentences about your organization.
Thank you. Let me first comment on your comment saying the landscape is too complex. It reminded me of my childhood when we were given tasks and we said it's impossible. And we always got this irritating quote from Fridtjof Nansen, who said, "Nothing is impossible, it just takes a little more time." And I think language technology really illustrates that. It's 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, many things that now are natural thing was considered impossible. So the complexity, I think, also will be manageable sometime. I am a member of an expert committee for the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages. The Charter, which is a treaty under the Council of Europe, has a purpose to protect and promote regional and minority languages in Europe. And it's the political basis is, of course, the Multilingual Europe, to maintain that and to thereby also maintain and develop the European identity. There are 25 countries members of the treaty, and in those countries there are 190 regional and minority languages, or rather minority language situations, with approximately 40 million speakers. Most of these languages are small. There are only a handful with more than 1 million speakers. The majority has below 50,000 speakers. So obviously, today it's difficult to see how at least the whole machinery of language technology tools can be directed and financed in relation to such small language communities. Nevertheless, if you single out what and give priority to what will be the most important areas where you should concentrate the efforts, I think you can achieve very much. I know there is, for example, a Sami language technology institute at the University in Tromsø in Norway. They use the language corpus of the Sami languages and other languages of the north, Greenlandic, for example. They make grammar-based services which are used a lot by the speakers themselves. So what I would look for is really these low-scale, so to speak, projects directed towards minority languages with relatively few speakers. And of course, as we see, it was shown to us yesterday that the small national languages, the Baltic languages, for example, they demand their right. They demand equal rights in the technologies world as the bigger national languages. And when the national languages are covered, then the same demand will come from the minority languages. And from the political perspective, it will be very difficult to refuse, based on the political basis, which is identical both for the Council of Europe and for the European Union.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'm sure we will come back also to the question of very small language, or I'm sure if nobody else would ask, I would ask a question about it, because that's a very interesting element of our work, because there are many of these languages and the markets are small. But now I would like first to hand over to Jochen Hummel, representing the language technology industry.
Thank you, Hans. My name is Jochen. I'm a serial entrepreneur and I'm chairman of LT Innovate, which is an industry association of language technology companies. And to follow up on the things Hans said in the introduction, we have, and I have of course a few pet themes, and one of them is indeed to show to the public and to industry, to CIOs, to potential customers, what kind of range language technology has. Because most people, and I talk primarily to business people, when they hear language and then they think translation, then they think Google Translate, and then the conversation is over. So what I'm trying to explain to them, that language technology is actually a key, and Hans made that remark already, to the knowledge which is stored not in things which you can put, or data which you can put in row and columns, but rather data which you have in text form. And while we are very good by now in processing data which is in row and columns, we haven't progressed much over the last decades in processing text, really. And language technology is the key to that. And of course, there's now this big data wave, which is great because we can ride on it. But there's much more to it than just the typical big data applications. It's more about how to process the knowledge, how to access the knowledge, how to search for the knowledge which is in text. So that's one of the things we are pushing. Of course, we want to push language technology in general, and I hope that our work has contributed a bit to the things which Kimmo was showing this morning, to the programs and to the awareness that this is a key research area, a key innovation area, and especially, of course, for Europe, because we are faced with this problem of dealing with several languages. And Hans just mentioned, the fragmentation. And the fragmentation in Europe we are seeing is not only because it's a field where there are very small companies and we have many countries and they all have their local markets, but there's a very hard dimension on fragmentation, and that's language. Because there are a lot of products out there and many companies out there, they offer great product, but they only support it in German and English, or maybe in 5 languages, or maybe in 10 languages. But their customer out there, they want 40, 50, 60 languages, and then they're out. So there's this fragmentation on a language dimension, and that leads me to my next pet subject. I have a software development background. I used to develop software myself. Some of you might know it. The Trados Translators Workbench is a product I've written, and many years ago. And of course, the toughest part in the software was to process all these different languages. And even for a rather simple translation memory application, you have to process language, do something with it. And as soon as you make something which is a bit smarter, you need to do more with it. Very tough. And I'm very kind of frustrated, I set it back, that 20 years later, when I wrote this, it's still a problem which all these companies have. And although the technology is out there, the data is out there, the resources are out there, still everybody has to develop its own thing. And talking about smaller languages, of course, when this addresses smaller languages, commercially there's almost nothing available. So another thing I'm pushing, and I'm kind of a pet subject of mine, is I see the basic underlying language technology as an infrastructure like roads or trails, because few people and few companies have the capability, and nobody really has the desire or can make a business model out of providing the infrastructure for all European languages, or even then, if you talk about the special languages, even less so. So what I would like to see, and therefore I'm kind of thrilled about the Connecting Europe facility, which has been presented this morning by Kimmo, some sort of an infrastructure which is maybe procured and maintained by the government side, as there are streets and bridges, so that language technology companies then are freed from this basic groundwork and can build their great applications. And there are thousands of applications we can dream about on top of such platform, and free them from the tedious work to do all the basic work themselves, which in the end they cannot do, of course. So that's another thing we are pushing for, and so my organization, Language Technology Innovate, works very closely with Meta, because a lot of the things I'm addressing here, a lot of the knowledge is actually available in the organizations represented by Meta, and I hope that jointly we can progress the industry and achieve these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jochen. Handing over to Kimmo. Kimmo, in his talk, went beyond the regular forecast or preview of the next research program by already saying that it's innovation and also CEF, the CEF program. But then he did something else that's new. He also mentioned the regional program that may have opportunities that go beyond even or add, are complementary to what Horizon 2020 and CEF can offer, because it's so big a task. We need to tap in whatever works and whatever we can get in order to get the right instruments for that. So that would be one thing that I would like to hear again from Kimmo some remarks on. And secondly, if you look at the European Commission or the European institutions itself, as a microcosmos, they are not less complex than the world outside. There also language is spread over so many places. There is the Directorate General for Translation, the one for interpretation, and then the same thing mirrored again at the European Parliament, and then for publication. And language plays a role in the culture, in the Directorate General for Culture, in the one for research, in the humanities, and the one of technologies. How do you think the European Commission itself can get to grips a little bit with pulling things together when it comes to language?
Okay, the last one is a question that I rather not answer, but I can go to the first one. About the new horizons in terms of partnering. We have to find total new layer of partners in the member states and in the regions. And I think that would to some extent also address the minority language, or at least a small language issue, if we manage to mobilize the regions, because the regions are where these languages are spoken, not always, and they are not always regions that are enjoying structural funds. Nevertheless, to make this happen, we have to go beyond this room. I mean, we are in front of a huge communication challenge. I mean, even if we agree that, yes, that's great, let's do that, before the rest of the world knows about this and learn to know about this, there's a long way. And it's not going to happen just like that. And if regional funds have been used in Lithuania, for example, successfully, it doesn't mean that it can be done in France tomorrow or even in Hungary, because the politician or the decision maker who decides about this in Hungary, if we just give the idea that why don't you add language resources technology for your language into your national program, he said, why would I do that? I have much more important themes that are competing. And then you can ask a question that, well, don't you think that the Hungarian language is important? I said, of course it's important, but these two things have nothing to do with each other. So, and maybe he's right, and this is the communication challenge that we are facing, that the only thing we can do at this point is to use ambassadors, so that let's all try to do something about it where we can make a difference at this point. And one thing about minority languages, I'm very glad, Sigve, that you are here, because I think your presence gives new insights and ideas, because it immediately came to me, what can we do in a European program to support minority languages? Somebody once called me and asked on the phone that that I'm from Finland, and then one of the languages of Finland is Sami, which has a semi-official position, asked me that, does the European Commission support the Sami language in your language technology program? And I said, no, not really, I don't think so. But then maybe the question was the wrong question, or wrongly formulated. What can your programs that are funded from the EU funds, what can they do for the Sami language? I mean, that is already a better question. So it's a communication issue. Because then I thought that, oh yes, why? We are paying a lot of attention to making language technology simpler for the untrained user to use. Let's NT allows people who know nothing about machine translation to train their own empty engines, just giving them corpora. So I give my corpus in Finnish and in Sami language, and I can train a machine translation system myself. I can do it myself thanks to results of a project, and I can do it for any language, even if there are only 10 speakers. Of course, you need the language resource as well, and if you don't have that for that minority language, then my advice is that create it, and that's also a possibility. So there is also a fancier word for that, crowdsourcing. So by crowdsourcing, if you have 50,000 speakers for a language, you have 50,000 potential creators of language resources, annotators. If you have tools which are so simple to use that anybody can use them to build corpora and annotate them, for example, that they don't even know that they are annotating. They are doing something fun, but it's actually they are doing something useful as well. So these kind of tools, easy to use tools, they come to the benefit of all languages, starting from those where there are only a few speakers. And the power of crowdsourcing is, well, it's demonstrated by Wikipedia. If you see articles written in Frisian or Papiamento, languages that you never knew that existed, there are people who there take pride creating articles in those languages because they want to prove that it's a language. And as soon as they do that, there are language resources for that language. The same is in Facebook. If you look at the choice of languages in which Facebook is available, again, these strange languages that you never heard of, that there are people out there who want voluntarily to translate that user interface into that odd language. So this is where the resources can come from. I mean, if the euros cannot come from the EU budget, but at least if we create tools and the sort of spirit of crowdsourcing that can help.
Thank you. That was a rather concrete hint, yeah, in a certain direction in which even if things are not directly funded as such, maybe through synergy cooperation of existing funding in community interest and maybe even a little bit of commercial interest. Yeah? There can be solution for something that at the first hand looks like there's no market, yeah, so it wouldn't work. So was an interesting line. But let me add also, even if you refuse to answer the question of the complexity of language in the European Union, I have to say that I admire your activities over many years in these committees, for instance, this interinstitutional committee that you have on language, where you try, even if it's difficult, to bring the people in the translation, interpretation, and all these other institutions together. But since you didn't comment on it, maybe it's too early to report on success there, but maybe next year. So then let me hand over to Meirion Prys Jones of the Network to Promote Linguistic Diversity. And please could you also in the beginning say a little bit what this network is?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here today as well. I represent a group of minority languages right across Europe. It's a new network that stretches from Galicia in the southwest up to Finland, to regions of France, Britain and Ireland. So it represents most of the minority language groupings mainly in Western Europe. So within the network, we have a great deal of expertise in terms of the promotion of minority languages. And that area has changed dramatically over the last 30 years in terms of what we understand by promoting a language, getting a language to be used. And I think you've already had some data about how many languages there are in Europe. There are about 6,000, 7,000 languages in the world, around 200, 250 languages in extended Europe, about 40 to 50 million people speaking less used languages within Europe itself. So there is a large group of people who speak languages which may not be the main language of any state or of that particular state. And if you look at language, of course, you can see that language is a very, very political issue. Language is very, very close to power. And if you look back at history, you can see how the nation states that have been built in Europe have gone into a situation where they tend to use one language only. And that is still a very strong theme. As people who deal with minority languages, we continually hit this buffer in terms of the European Union of having 23, 24 official languages and stop. It won't go any further. So there's that issue there in terms of trying to open that door of saying there are many more languages in Europe. It's part of our cultural heritage. It's a fact of life. You don't just say, well, we'll wipe those languages off the face of the earth and hopefully we can get by on 24 languages. So it is very, very much a political issue. But of course, we need the tools that are being developed today. There's no doubt about that. The language that I speak as a minority language, which is Welsh, would not exist today were it not for technology. In 1536, it was banned. It could not be used in the public life of England and Wales. So for the last 450 years, it was not a language which could be used. But because of technology, which was at the time the printing press and the translation of the Bible into Welsh, the language survived and still survives today and is spoken by around 750,000 people. So we can see that in terms of minority language communities, that making sure that you take advantage of the technology is really vital to ensure that the languages survive. So there needs to be a European vision that encompasses all these languages within Europe. There is a general message coming out from European institutions saying that multilingualism is great. Minority languages should be supported, that they are part of our heritage. So the messages are all positive, but the actions are more or less negligible. Nothing actually happens. Nobody invests. Nobody actually ensures that any action is taken. So it's good in terms of the work that Metanet is doing, is that minority languages are included within this package of the link between technology and languages. We need to be part of the translingual cloud. We need to look at machine translation, at speech technologies. All these need to be looked at in the context of minority languages. A number of the minorities, of course, are doing that already. Some of the minorities in Europe, such as the Catalans, are bigger than most of the majorities. So there is work that's being undertaken, but there needs to be a concerted effort, certainly on our behalf as well, but also from the European Commission and the European Union to ensure that these languages, which may not be commercially successful, have a backing. And you can feel that there is a wave coming through Europe in terms of support. The European Parliament last week or the week before voted by a majority of 650 to 24 that these languages needed more support, that there needed to be more backup. We are trying to do things ourselves within the network. We've already set up our own group to look at how do we work together to use language technologies. And we can see the value of them. We want to work, obviously, with a broader group as well. But we need more than good words for the future. We need action from those organizations which can help us. we're willing to work with anybody who wants to work with us, and certainly we have the vision, the commitment, and some of the expertise, but we do need help on a broader stage, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the last of the speakers, or the last of the panelists who has not talked yet, is Tamás Váradi, who will talk today now more on behalf of EFNIL than on behalf of anything else.
Thank you. Let me first briefly introduce this organization of European Federation of National Institutions for Language, which incidentally is celebrating its 10th anniversary next month. It unites 29 countries, and it has 2 institutional members from each country. One typically is an academic or university center, and one a non-governmental or governmental department concerned with language policy, language development. So this is the setup, and we usually operate in annual conferences devoted to a central topic, which gives rise to a publication, a book, and sometimes a declaration, a position paper on various issues like the role of language and education, national identity, translation, dictionaries, over a wide range of issues, really. And by constitution, we are obviously and inherently concerned with national languages. But of course, one language may be a national language in one region and a minority language in another. Just consider Hungarian, which is a minority language in 5 countries neighboring Hungary. So our concern is not exclusively devoted to languages that has the status of a state language. And of course, this variety of languages immediately brings up the issue of multilinguality, down to the very practical point of how many languages we, in the annual conferences, we should provide interpreters for, and what sort of languages. And these are heady issues for ourselves. I believe I'm one of the people in the panel representing an organization that has already good working relations with Meta. But there is a scope for cooperation in the future. I think that EFNIL is both a user and a contributor, potential contributor to language technology. As I look around my colleagues within the organization, I see plenty of room for raising awareness about the potential of language technology. So most of these centers are not technology savvy, to put it mildly. On the other hand, they are doing invaluable work developing language resources of immense potential for language technology use. So I believe this is one of the assets that is of great importance as far as EFNIL is concerned. On the other hand, we are also engaged in activity that partially overlaps with concerns of Meta. I'm referring to our recent the MetaNet white paper, which has a similar initiative within EFNIL, European Language Monitor, which not so much tries to chart out the territory of these languages from the language technology point of view, but in terms of use of languages, national, foreign language learning, etc. So that is a very valuable survey that would be of interest to get a complete picture of language use across Europe. And then there is also a project called EFNILEX, which is directly a language technology project born out of the realization that many of the language pairs within EFNIL are commercially of little interest to serious publishers as far as dictionaries are concerned, for example. And we launched a pilot project to see what extent language technology could help alleviate the task of developing bilingual dictionaries, which are, as I said, not of commercial interest to publishers. They want to develop dictionaries like that. So we are doing this pilot project, extracting lexica, bilingual dictionaries out of parallel corpora, and now we are exploring the use of comparable corpora to derive such dictionaries. It's a pilot project waiting to be scaled up on the European level. So again, I see actual cooperation between the respective institutions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This was very concrete actions at the end on the side of EFNIL and possibilities for cooperation. Before we open the floor, which we will do soon, let me give the panelists a quick chance to add and respond now. Not all of you have to do it, but it's only if there are some urgent comments on what was said, and I hand over to Sigve.
Thank you. Just one point, following up your comment on Hungarian, because one group of minority languages are those that often were divided by national borders. They have a similar language, which is a national language somewhere. German, Ukrainian, Hungarian are examples of this. In Germany, you have Danish in Schleswig-Holstein, which has its national language on the northern side of the border. These languages, of course, are languages in their own rights. They have their own tradition, own history, own culture. They have developed differently from the original languages, so to speak. But what we find in a number of cases is that the written standard is identical to the written standard of the big brother which is a national language. So for this group of minority languages, there really is a possibility, because you would have difficulties in the oral part of it, because they would pronounce things differently, but the written standard would be a way into these languages. So that would be one interesting opportunity, I would say. I also would pick on the idea of regional funds. I would not be surprised if the Sami Language Technology Institute in Tromsø is not partly funded by regional funds, because the Sami language covers the three languages in North Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And many of the minority languages in Europe, they have their traditional base in rural areas. And many of these rural areas would, I guess, qualify for regional funds. So there are opportunities also for these smaller languages.
So thank you very much. If there's no immediate reaction anymore, I would like to open the floor, but I would take the freedom to, before we do this, to make two remarks that may help a little bit to focus these, because there are so many different points. Now we could talk for quite a while on minorities in other, in larger regions, on languages that are really tiny, on all the different situations, yeah, that we have, on immigrant languages, there are so many exciting issues. Let me make two remarks that may help a little bit, yeah, or maybe to focus things. A very fashionable word that is used in so many, that's so highly ambiguous, that's used in so many senses is platform. So you talk about the iOS platform or about the iPhone platform. Yeah? You talk, everything is today a platform. Yeah? If something is big enough, it's a platform. But the platform idea has some charm. It has some real use in it if you think about it. Yeah? So if we would say that in our field, yeah, our area is so diverse, combined of so many, so we could envisage on two levels platforms. On the one level, on the organizational, and actually beyond MetaNet there's Meta, that is already kind of a platform having EFNIL and many others involved, many other groups, yeah, that is dedicated to technological foundations of multilingual Europe, and that needs many, many, many players. Yeah. It's so complex that it's, and MetaNet is one player among them, and not even maybe the biggest one, yeah, if you take the size. Secondly, so that's on the organizational, in order to put pressure on. But then on the technological side, daydreaming, let's imagine we had the European language platform, or let's call it translingual or cross-lingual or multilingual platform, with lots of technologies for many, many, many languages, and it's all there, yeah, all there. Then we wouldn't be sitting and thinking, does this language belong there or not? Yeah, does the other, is it a national language? Is it a European language? Is it a migrant language? Is it a majority, minority? Is it a variant of Norwegian, or are the two Norwegian languages one? Then if you had the platform, then it would be up to the language community, to companies, to others with the help, just to establish one more language on that platform. And it would not take these endless discussions, what's in, what's out, how much money do we have? So the question is, isn't that one more reason for this, pushing for this platform idea without even deciding which languages will be on? Can I open the floor? Yes, there's a first.
Gütertal from the company TBS. To make the situation, to say it in the words of Hans, even more complex than before, what I'm missing here is a linguist on the panel. Because I would like to know, we are talking in nature about the variety and the richness of the nature. And when it comes to languages, I'm just looking for research work. What does it mean if you have, instead of, let's say, 20 languages, here in Europe, as Sigve was saying, 250 languages. And I think this is an iceberg which has not yet exploited or explored so far. Because in the communication we have, we have a lot of communication problems, and we are going to workshops with communication. Maybe we can learn from minority languages how to solve problems on political ways easier.
Thank you. I'm not a linguist, I'm a lawyer, but we have found in the work we have done with the European Language Charter that defining a language maybe is more a political issue than a linguistic issue. If you talk to linguists about Scots being a separate language in the United Kingdom, you will always get a lot of objections. But the government, the UK government, has acknowledged Scots as a separate language. And then it becomes a separate language. So in a sense, it's much more a political issue, at least when you acknowledge a minority language which are so close to a national language. We have, there are many examples of that. So to define a language, well, I'm glad I don't have to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, somebody else do this? Yes.
I was going to, if you don't mind.
No, of course not.
I do consider myself a linguist, so harumph. But I think part of the thing is if we did have linguists working on this, I think, you know, more sort of forcefully, we might have to talk about 2,500 languages instead of 250. I don't know, but an interesting thing is coming up here, because we talk about the notion of why aren't the minority languages getting more, you know, why aren't they more central to this discussion? Why isn't there more emphasis, more funding, and so forth? At the same time, Hans, you're alluding to the idea of basically a market here, right? We're talking about a market for this thing that we're talking about, putting a platform out in front of the market and letting the market then determine which languages are going to get play and get attention to some degree, or the community. Yeah, that's another word for a grouping of, well, basically that leads me to the word that I really want to say, which is the demand. And one of the things that's interesting from the industry side of things is we are driven completely by demand. We don't initiate anything. So, you know, if someone came to us and said, we need translations into Sami tomorrow, yes, we're there, please, how much do you need? How many pounds of translations? But it's not happening. So the question is, why isn't it happening? I mean, one of the questions I have is, why doesn't that demand happen? And it's not only within Europe and not only minority languages, it's of course, in some ways, a worldwide problem. But what is it about the demand side that is there something missing? Is it up to the EU to drive the demand more heavily? Would that be a function that we should be looking at putting pressure on? Would that do more? Or is that actually making the problem worse? I don't know. I'm a little bit putting that out there for everyone.
I would say it's a bit demand and supply. Of course, there's a demand, and the demand is fulfilled, right? But when you talk about infrastructure, of course, you do not build a street just for one car driving somewhere. But when the street is there, many might drive there, and the restaurants will open up, and so on. So it's demand and supply. And in some cases, the demand is not strong enough that industry would fulfill the supply, and that's why you have public infrastructures. But also the public side cannot do everything, but then a community which has a special interest in something might then find the funding, or maybe crowdfund it, or find other ways, and then probably the supply is there, which will trigger then interesting applications. So I think it has to go hand in hand. Often it needs to be like started, kicked off, and then players continue on. But if you work on both sides, I think you're doing fine.
Just a short comment in terms of demand. If you're in a situation where your language hasn't been an official language of any sort ever, or may have lost that status some time ago, actually people don't instantly switch to use that language in a formal situation. It takes some time, it takes a lot of provision, and it takes a lot of encouragement. So it's not a simple equation of saying, if it's there, they'll use it. Or if they want it, they'll demand it. It doesn't work that way. It takes a long time and a lot of persuasion, and also making it sure that it's readily accessible for speakers of minority languages to make that choice, because automatically they're programmed to choose English or French. So it's a bigger challenge than just supply and demand.
Yeah, thanks for this remark, please.
Yeah, I would like to share with you our experience with minority language in Spain, because I remember in the 90s that the regional governments, they pushed by law the use of that language. But it was a change in the beginning of the 2000, in 2002, when it was not a law, but was a hard recommendation of the Spanish government that for the official websites, it should be used all the official co-languages. That happened after being in all the corridors, on all the ministries, myself, selling Catalan, Galician, and Basque for 2 years. And we help them to develop this presence of the minority language in the website. And today, the only media, the only ecosystem where there is a normality between the different co-official languages, more or less, is the website. It's the only place where there is a coexistency and it's a normality, not in TV, not in radio, but in the website, the important information, not all, because of cost as well, but the important information of the central government is in the 5 languages. Sometimes decision if Catalan or Valenciano is political decision. No, there are 7 dialects of Catalan, not 7, linguistically talking. That's experience, and I think that this can be useful. So it's not enough regional laws, but national laws that push because of political reason, because economical reason are not enough, because the communities are not big.
Maybe one reason why on the web you have all the co-official languages coexisting in more or less the same manner is because the web is a platform. And that comes back to what Hans Uszkoreit just said, that maybe we don't have to think that much in terms of single languages, but more in terms of a platform, as Jochen just said, in terms of roads. And then many cars can drive on the roads, and languages are just cars in which thought can travel. So the question is, what really makes a platform, and what the EU could do to develop such a platform? I mean, we heard this morning about the many languages which coexist on Wikipedia or on Facebook, and those are platforms. And what makes those platforms is that they have common rules and they have common technology with application programmer interfaces that can be used openly. And I think when we are talking about the vision of a European language technology service platform, the important thing is that we talk about standards, that is common rules which we can create, and also a common technology to which individual tools and services and resources can hook up in a free and inexpensive way. And I think inexpensive is very important here. I mean, if driving was very expensive, there wouldn't be so many cars around, there wouldn't be so much traffic. And I think one answer to the other Hans's, or one of the other Hans's question, why there is so little demand is because there is so little money around also. So I think we have to make sure that even with a small wallet, you can hook up to the platform and have the same presence as languages with more resources behind them.
I think the Spanish case is very interesting, and it illustrates also what Marco said yesterday, that in the first phase you need public money, and you need money, and you also probably need some legislation or some instructions to force people to use the languages you are focusing on. Remember, Catalan was a banned language during Franco regime, and now it's one of the biggest regional languages in Europe. And that has happened, I think, with a combination of a government-driven campaign and research and commercial companies. I think the idea of a platform is a very interesting idea, because what you would do with a platform is that you will reduce some of the initial costs. You will, in a sense, you will step up some levels, and then the cost for inclusion of new languages will be less. So in that perspective, I think it's a very interesting idea.
We also have to be careful not to kidden ourselves, because we're talking a lot about minority languages on a global scale. Even German is a minority language. And you see this, there are great applications out there who work fine in English and they don't even work in German or French or Italian. So it's not only a problem for the very small languages, it's a problem for all European languages. And of course, if we would have such platform, it would be easier, much easier to resource and find support for the big languages, because there the return of investment is obvious. But then what you're saying is completely right. Once you have that platform, of course, it's very easy to plug in the other pieces, because the most difficult part, of course, is to define the platform, define the standards, define where's the borderline between what is infrastructure and what should be left to companies to come up with, all these things. Once you have this, adding the other thing is just work, which can be funded one way or the other, maybe crowdfunded or whatever.
Yeah, well, I would just support that, and what both of you Hanses have said, and also Jochen's very well taken points. The underlying thing there is the word standards that keeps coming up. And we talk a lot about standards in the industry, but we actually have near zero in the language industry. In fact, I think we might have one that we can call a real standard, universally accepted, mostly followed. But it's very hard to get anybody but the super geeks to get interested in standards. And standards are precisely the sort of thing that collectives have to do. Because if a big company creates something and calls it a standard, it's not a standard, it's just a specification that somebody else might follow. That's not the same thing as a standard. And you look at other infrastructure types of things where, railroads, for example. It's not until the rail gauge size was standardized across Europe and going into Russia and other parts that trains could actually move around and carry and do all the commerce and communicating and so forth. So one of the efforts I think we need to look at is how, in fact, we create real standards for this platform. And maybe we need more effort on that front.
Can I just add in that context, if you look at the European Union, the word union is a bit ambiguous, because really we're not a particularly good union. And one of the reasons behind that, of course, is the issue of language, that we really haven't dealt with. How do we deal with languages? We've seen it as a problem. It's a problem for economic success. We have so many languages. But it's not true. It's our heritage, and therefore we have to deal with it. And part of the European Union's work should be to deal with it. And therefore, in that context, the point you were making about who should set this up, obviously in terms of making the best value or the best use of the resources we have, it's the European Union. But it needs to do that in a way which doesn't reflect itself as a club of 24, but as an all-encompassing union.
Thank you.
It's a bit on another topic, so if there is still one answer from the public to this, please go ahead. But okay, let's go. There was a topic, at least it could be related actually to exactly all the last comment on standards. So there was another issue, Hans Uszkoreit and Jochen at least mentioned, the relation between language and knowledge, and you keep stressing that knowledge is best expressed using natural language. But then we discovered that knowledge representation didn't match with language knowledge or language representation. And I think that this is also a big challenge I would like to continue working on and for the community. And also in the context of two projects funded by the Commission, LOD and Monet, for example, we had some cooperation. So this linguistic link open data framework is starting to work a bit. Might be an issue, and you were also mentioning a dictionary in the DBpedia environment, in the linked data. Could be a good way to link all those data, language data and data knowledge together, so that you get, if you want, a framework or a platform that could be promising. I'm not sure about this, but it looks like it could deliver something. I know from you, Hans, that on Monday you will give an invite to talk to these LOD people, so the connection is done. And also would like to mention maybe that at the next LREC conference we will stress on this linked data principle, that might be a way to link language data as object of knowledge, and maybe we might be better able to connect those two fields. So I found those comments very, very helpful for us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Next, do you have a microphone?
My name is Torbjørg Breivik. I'm working for the Norwegian Language Council, and I will make some remarks to Jochen and his remarks on infrastructure and market, and also to the others who have discussed the market here. In Norway, we face the situation that if we should get some language technology product and services, we have to do something about it ourselves. And what we did, we worked for it for a long time with the politicians, but we got the decision, and now we are building up the infrastructure for Norwegian. And that's the way of doing it. And it's paid by public money. So it's possible. And all what's in this collection is available both for research and for industry. It's free and open. Also tools. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of work done, of course, and it could be used by research or industry, but one problem is if you're a smaller software company and there are all these initiatives, right, it's almost impossible to then plug them into your system. So what I'm looking at, and I'm often use this example, what I'm looking at is an API. So if you, for example, want to develop a website and it has location-based services, probably what you're going to use is Google Maps and a few lines, and you have it web and location enabled globally. And that's very powerful and very easy, and the same way I picture it, it should be for language. Because if I have to see what you guys have done in Norway and other guys have done in Hungary and here and there, as a small company, even if everything would be there, easily to access, just to understand the different APIs, the limitations, the way they've done this or that, it's already too much. And as a matter of fact, the stuff is there, but it's just not accessible. It has to be as accessible as I can access worldwide mapping through location-based services provided by Google.
Yes, Jürgen Wiedekind, University of Copenhagen. I didn't really get what New Horizons means. If I phrase it in terms of Paul Feyerabend, who made the famous distinction between normal science and scientific revolutions. What does New Horizons mean in this context? Revolutions or normal science?
Well,
if we use examples for scientific revolutions, take Google search or Siri or whatever, finding a brand new application, maybe also a scientific revolution. Well, normal science is something like that. You have a few components, you plug them together, you fine-tune them, maybe you train them on larger corpora, you screw here, you screw there, build a user interface, maybe, and then adapt it to new languages, and so on. This can be organized, very fine-grained, in time schedule, with work packages, and all that stuff works fine, because it's controllable. Revolutions are not controllable. But is there anybody who has investigated the conditions which led to revolutions? I'm not sure.
Revolutions normally happen from the outside and not from the inside.
No. It's not so easy.
And you don't plan revolutions.
No.
And you don't plan them, yeah?
But you have a context for that. Okay? So, maybe look at a few examples. Interestingly enough, most people were students. So they were not in some existing infrastructure like university as an employee or something like that. Then it was only small groups with very creative people. They had ideas and they didn't need external pressure. They made a lot of internal pressure. They were not organized. Did they have a time schedule? I don't think so. But they were fighting for something.
I think
Is there any distinction between the funding schemes, which are the appropriate instruments for funding both?
Let me, it's I think a worthwhile question that you always have to ask if you are hoping for big innovation, But let me first hand over to Jochen, who will give you a short answer, then I will give an even shorter one.
Well, you asked two questions, right? Where's this big revolution and then how do we get there, right? And I think Kimmo showed today already something which is more helpful. But I think what we said in the beginning is that, the point I try to make, we're very good with handling data, huge amounts of data we can put in rows and columns. We are lousy and there hasn't been much progress with the so-called unstructured data text. And I've heard numbers, so if I'm a typical institution or a typical company, how much of my data is in rows and columns, so SAP or Oracle somewhere, bookkeeping is working on, and how much is in unstructured data text. But even if you would say it's, let's say, half and half, and for institutions it's probably 20-80, half of your knowledge is somewhere, and nobody has access to it. So top management or management information systems or your sales department, wherever, they all work on stuff which is in some relational databases. How cool would it be if you have access to this other half? And we're slowly getting there. And of course, the people who use big data and know slightly bit more about the markets than their competitors, they already will outperform them and will make a lot of money. And I think that's something where this community actually can deliver the tools to access this other half. And you have seen how big companies have grown with enterprise resource planning. I mean, that's a huge problem. If we can somehow, through language technology, tackle the knowledge problem, I think many companies here, many spin-offs, many research managers or research staff will have a great career ahead of them.
So, okay, Kimmo.
I think part of the question was addressed to the institutional funding agencies of how can we stimulate revolutions or technology revolutions at least, or breakthroughs. And it's true that the instrument of a collaborative project where you have a consortium of at least three legal entities from 3 different European countries may not be the most stimulating for such a revolution. And then I think we have been doing some internal thinking, of course, that what are the motivators for such a breakthrough, and some psychologists who have studied the behavior of investors on stock markets say that the prime motivators are 2. They are fear and greed. So how do we resort to these motivators, fear and greed? So fear will be rather difficult, fear of failure. How do you use that motivator? Well, greed, we have an instrument that we are foreseeing in the Horizon 2020, which is prize. So if you manage to solve this problem, you win 1 million euros. And you don't have to explain how you use it. You win 1 million euros. So maybe that will more address to the greed component, because that instrument actually has proved rather successful in public funding as well.
There's another great tool for the greed component, which is procurement. If you go out and say, I want this, and please make offers, well, there will be a lot of companies coming, say, yeah, here, 100 million, and you get it. So that's another very powerful tool, which is often triggering and pushing innovation.
Let me, before going to the next question and topic, respond here, and in a way that may drive the discussion back to where we started out from. It is not purely accidental where new revolution happens and where innovation happens. So there is a very strong correlation, for instance, between funding, if you just look at the places where innovation comes, and non-funding. That doesn't mean that exactly in the funded project, as a goal of that project, innovation happens, but good funding creates the hotbed, yeah, and that's why if you look now and place the revolutions on the map and correlate that with a level of continued funding of good work, then you see a correlation. That's a correlation in space. So the second one is a correlation in time. At certain times, suddenly lots of revolutionary things happen. And especially after GPS was there, global positioning system, lots of other things came up. That's Jochen's favorite example, I'm stealing from him. Lots of other things came up that were not planned, yeah, that you could do with GPS. And and today we do lots of things with the mobile phone that it was never made for, yeah? It was made for something else. And if we had something like a European platform of languages as the first region in the world that has something, yeah, for many languages, I would predict that the number of additional things that will be built on top of that would be endless. Yeah, so, and so that means on both sides, on the funding, the basic funding of very good research, and on the creation of new platforms that then are enablers for lots of creativity, we need to do something. So now, Dan, you were the next.
Well, time is already pressing us. When you spoke about the overloading of the meaning of platform, I remember the same happened with the concept of system. So 30 years ago, no system engineer would agree with what everybody called a system for doing, computing something. So this is happening again, but with your example, platform. So I would come back to something that Sigve mentioned, that the legal regulations in the country are extremely important for our domain, for promoting languages and language technology. And so I remember what happened in the early 90s when a lot of products and a lot of companies came into Romania and selling their products with no instructions in Romanian. So this was not only the case of Romania, it was a general case for the Eastern Europe. Then, in most countries, a law was stipulated to, for any product on the market should be instructions, use instructions in Romanian, in the national language. But what happens, and I think that this is EFNIL job, is to check the quality of translations for these instructions. And I dare say that except for pharmaceutical industry, all the other translations are deficient, to be mild. Including e-commerce websites. So recently I experienced trying to buy a ticket on a cheap flight which has a site in Romanian, but the language was so poor that I misunderstood their message, so I had to pay some extra charges on the airport. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
The question of fear as opposed to the other thing could also be translated into laws. I think the European Union can do a lot there, taking off on the documentation that comes with so many products. I find that practically everything I buy now has documentation in at least 10, 15 languages, simply because the combination of EU regulations and national regulations have brought that out. On the other hand, if I look at most even European Union sites, most of the stuff is in English, maybe 80–90% is in French, maybe half of it might be in German and Italian, and all the other languages, there's just a bit. Now, I know it's a question of money and it's a question of time, but what you might want to take back is perhaps as a sort of a platform concept to make it open, as Wikipedia is, to have people have a choice. If this page has not been translated into whether it's Danish or Sami or Welsh or even Italian, then people should have a choice, either to choose any number of providers of machine translation or other translation services, or taking it a step further, it should be possible for citizens and providers to help in the translation process, much the same way as Wikipedia has done. Now, a lot of things would have to be worked out, but in terms of a platform, this would also open up a place for many people who provide translation tools, whether they're MT tools or combined tools, to be able to showcase their translation tools. I mean, as far as I know, there are tens of thousands of pages of various European institutions that have not been translated even into the 24 official languages, to say nothing of the various regional languages. So it's a combination of one, providing a platform, but also providing the, shall we say, the legal incentive, the fear that if you don't do it right, if you don't open the doors, there could be a penalty involved. That would be a thought that I would want to add.
Thank you. Is there anybody?
Well, I would say I would rather see an industry progressing because we sell more or we do things more efficiently or information travels better than by tough regulation, because we also have to be practical. I mean, if even the EU with all their resources, thousands of translators don't get it done, how should somebody else get it done? So I think we have to be practical there, and many people in the European Union, especially in the professional area who are reading this stuff, they are, as a matter of fact, bilingual, and their passive knowledge of English is probably better than whatever machine translation you can produce in their native language. But there are many other things we can do. So their active knowledge, for example, is not so good. So with a much lesser effort, you can help them, for example, to improve their search. So I can read most of the stuff in English without any issue, but even with a relative good English, sometimes I have a hard time searching for these things. So I think we should be practical, and instead of implying laws and regulations, we would rather think about, okay, and I think as a businessman, of course, how can we find more customers? How can I increase revenue with my e-commerce site by having a better categorization or make it easier to find the products? So rather think positively, think more revenue, think happier customers, because if the manual is crappy or there's no Romanian manual at all and the competitor has it, well, then the competitor should sell more if it's really important to the consumer. So going for legal, pushing laws and over-regulate, I don't know, I think it's always better to think positive.
Yeah, just a short comment. I think the case from Romania illustrates the need for different competences, and in many cases, I think the legislation forcing, for example, public bodies to have multilingual web pages are important, but if you don't combine that with linguistic competence, then it's just nothing. It's just something in the sand that disappears. So you have to combine various competences in order to be successful. I think that that should be a message also to governments, that you don't start doing anything until you also secure the language competence in, for example, safety instructions, things like that.
Thank you.
So we mentioned fear, we mentioned greed as a potential driving force. I want to add one more, how to win over decision makers particularly. When we invited them to the recent Caesar Roadshow, not for a language technology event, but advertised as the role of Hungarian language in the digital age, there was an incredible turnout of politicians at ministerial levels. So this national pride certainly is something that we should try to exploit to the best benefit of driving language technology.
Yes, that was a very thoughtful remark, but unfortunately I think we cannot take any questions from the audience anymore. That was a very, very good discussion. I'm sure that many of you still wanted to say something, but stay tuned. It's not over yet. Please stay where you are, and you also please stay where you are. And but before we do this, I want to thank the panelists for their very good contributions. So, and now, in order to try something new, let's close this conference without closing it. Yeah, I will show you how to do this. Yeah, and you all need it. You all have to participate in it. Yeah, you all have to play a part in it. Before we close this conference without closing it, and please stay where you are. Yeah, so because no commotion, we do this in a way that nobody will really have felt that the conference was closed. Yeah, it doesn't. So please, there are a few upcoming conferences in the next future. Yeah. So and usually at the end of a conference you point at the next one. Yeah. So but the next couple of conferences that are coming up are the European Data Forum and LREC and so on. So we would. I would like to do the following thing, maybe have somebody for LREC and European Data Forum, and I see a person there who would be suited, say only a word when they are and where. Then there will be a remark on an upcoming conference that is under very short deadline, because where the deadline is running out almost immediately, and then we are ready to close the conference. Yeah. Nicoletta, would you?
The European Data Forum is in March. I don't remember the week in March, and it is in Athens. And the call for paper should be circulated, I think, next week.
Okay.
So be prepared. And it's very important that we have a mixture of data and language.
Yes.
So language people.
Yes, last time language was there, represented, but only at a very small contingent. Some of us remember we had a very nice panel, but it was too small. So this time, please come in big numbers.
This time we try to have a mixture of data and language technology, language resources, etc.
Yeah. And then the next announcement is for a conference that doesn't have to fear that not enough people will come, because usually there are many of us there. Please.
For LREC?
Yeah.
For LREC, it's in a strange Mediterranean country, which is Iceland. It's last week of May. And there is a special hot topic, which is big data, linked open data, language resources, and human language technology. So again, we want to have a mixture of we want to have many data people at LREC, and I already know that there are many that are planning to do this. There is another thing that I want to mention for LREC. There is this highlight for LREC 2014, which is share your language resources. When you submit a paper, not only describe the resources that you use, but if you can, for licensing reasons, please upload the resource, data, software, service, whatever, or give a link so that they are available for all of us. That's very important also for replicability of research results, which is important in science. So I really encourage everyone to share resources. And there is the second call for paper just circulated.
Yes.
Many thanks.
Thank you, Nicoletta. And then there is a, okay. Hold on.
I want to add briefly, but there will be another multilingual web workshop also in March, focused around the LEADER project, which was introduced yesterday by Asu. So it will be a similar bridge building exercise like at the European Data Forum, but with more focus to the constituencies of multilingual web. So that will be announced not next week, well, in the next weeks, plural. Thank you.
Yes. And then there is a conference that's coming up very, very soon, and Zygmunt will say a word about that.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zygmunt Vetulani. I am from the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, in Poland. I'm pleasure to invite you, together with Hans Uszkoreit, to the 6th Language and Technology Conference, Human Language Technologies as a Challenge for Computer Science and Linguistics. We started this conference in 1995 as awareness days in language and technologies organized by the European Commission. Then, since 2005, it is organized every 2 years in Poland. The coverage of this conference is very large, so I will not go into details. I would like to point your attention also to 2 workshops which are integrated to this conference. One is this is a workshop invented by Joseph Mariani and Khalid Shukri. We started the workshop on less resourced languages. This will be the 3rd edition of this workshop. It is endorsed. It was endorsed as a conference, by the way, by L. Rafael Larnet and MetaNet. There is another conference more addressed to the industrial environment. It is about the interactions and links between business and language technologies. There is also one thing which is new. This will be an extra call within this general call of the conference, mostly addressed to the language resources producers and companies. And this will be a call which will be published next week through the website of the conference and through for example, corporalis and that kind of instrument. So you are welcome. I would be happy to see your names in the. If you please look on the right. Second page, these are names of our community, of the former authors of the conference. I will be happy to see your names there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You can read all these names very clearly, see if you're already on there. If you are not, then please come to the conference to make sure that you get on. Yes?
There is one more conference, and it's right here in Berlin. Everybody hears me? Yes. So there's one more conference not to forget, because the terminologists, they're getting very tired of being left out. Because terminology is knowledge, and knowledge is linked to language, guys. So basically in June next year, there will be the TKE, is that correct? TKE, here in Berlin. Yeah. ESTeam will support the organization somewhat, but it's mainly organized by other people, okay?
Maybe it's okay. Okay. Then, okay. So then I have a very interesting task now. I have to close this day, these 2 days without closing, because you know after that it's not over. Out there are exhibits and there will be coffee and cake. It will not be downstairs, but it will be upstairs. And please, all of you who have not used the chance to look at these exciting exhibits, go around and have chats and discuss all of the things we discussed. Discuss the things that were discussed over the 2 days, try to find solutions, new partnerships. I'm extremely happy about having had such a, this time that made this edition of Metaforum a little different, had very, very concrete reports and demands, and especially reports from many industrial companies, more than 20, 25 or so industrial companies who gave very, very good talks here. Lots of research, although this was not the focus of this conference this time. We don't have yet a volunteer for next year's Metaforum. Any MetaNet site in all these 34 countries would qualify if somebody takes it over. There would be a slight advantage, again, to a city that starts with a B, because we had it always in B cities so far. So if it's Barcelona or Bucharest or I don't know, so Belgrade, so there are a couple of other possibilities around in Europe. So feel free, don't be shy to put in a bid if you're interested in. We should really think now how, with this extended community, each time there are new groups here, we don't lose the communication, and it's very nice. So we had people over the years, there's more and more communities coming, and there's new communities this time, the minority languages. Let's hope that we don't lose the connection, and see that if you do things in the area of technology, or if we do things in the area of policy making, and so that we team up and do this together, I think we should talk and find opportunities for doing this. So I'm very grateful for you to come. EFNIL is already a partner now for a couple of years. GALA is a couple now already for 2 or 3 years. So the community is growing year by year, and suggest new groups that are interesting and interested in us for the next Metaforum. Bring them along, invite them. So that was maybe all I had to say. I thank everybody very, very much. Now still something. See, it's very active. Tamás.
I'm sorry, Hans, but I think as a member of the executive board of MetaNet, as a former organizer of Metaforum, and as a private participant of this conference, I think it shouldn't be closed before giving credit for what really surprised me and impressed me most. Intellectual content of this conference, I believe, was stronger than ever. I mean, usually one tends to think of such events as primarily devoted to community building, making plans, reaching out, etc. But I think that not just the keynote speeches, but the presentations that I heard was really full of excellent ideas, inspiring news. It really was up to a serious conference level. And I want to thank the organizers for picking such a strong group of people to talk. And of course, it is, I would like to think, is also a sign of maturity of the whole field, that although it's not a dedicated thematic conference yet, we have this large number of very strong presentations. And I hope that you share this feeling with me. and you don't mind me recording credit to the organizers and all presenters. Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Tamás, for your words. I had wanted anyway as the next thing, before not closing the thing that needs to be closed, Georg and Alyosha and Al and Corinna and Felix and many, many other helpers who helped to make this possible. So thank you very much. So, and now we could simply go out, but the problem is that we promised the ministry, we had to, yeah, otherwise we would not have gotten this wonderful room, to leave anything closed, not open, yeah, and don't leave open things around, yeah. So we have to close the conference because of this ministry. So this time we will close a conference in a completely new way. Yeah? Usually you do this by what we call in linguistics a performative, yeah? Like a marriage. I declare you married, so I would say I declare it closed, and it's closed forever, and the ministry cannot complain. So, but in this case, it's a little more tricky now because you still should go out and have very interesting discussions. So I ask you for a crowdsourcing kind of, yeah, wisdom of the crowds. Each of you helps and closes it a little bit out there at the end of your talks. At the end of your discussion, everybody. So it's this time a collective closing, yeah? I don't close it now. We keep it open, you go out, it's still open, yeah? And then at the end of your discussion, but please don't forget, and so that you wouldn't forget, yeah, let me do, instead of putting a knot in your handkerchief, do something that you've never seen at a Metaforum before. And this is a person from Alaska living in Berlin playing a Hungarian instrument.